So, welcome to this week's interview with the CIPR Sports Group. I'm Chris Haynes, and with me is Sarah Pearce. And this week, our guest is Steve Martin. He's the founding partner of MSQ and been up and running for about 18 months there. Before then, Hill and Knowlton, Adidas, M&C Saatchi, decades in communications and PR, always from what I've seen, driving new ideas, delivering results. But actually, Steve, you'll make a better intro. Tell us about your career.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of conscious I don't want to give you a history lesson, I guess, Chris, but thank you for asking me to come on to this. I'm very much intrigued about our conversation today because of, our background in PR has been from where we started, from where I started for sure, right at, back in the days when I did a year out at Adidas during my degree at Manchester, and I worked in the PR department then way back. So I'm not going to even tell you the year, but that went on to then be get a job at Hill and Knowlton, which was, the very renowned sort of American agency that had a really brilliant and big presence in the UK, and ended up working for them in golf and on the Ryder Cup in 1993, believe it or not, and that followed on very quickly then to winning the Adidas business to launch the Predator boot worldwide in '94 before the World Cup in USA. And that led me just to, be part of that whole Adidas regime and I guess cutting my teeth from a global perspective, not just locally, and working on, sport day in, day out. I mean, it sort of takes over your life in a way, and the communication side of that was supercharged and super exciting, albeit there was no digital and social media then. So it was very much about who you know and how you can persuade people within more traditional mediums. But I then moved in-house to Adidas for a long time. And again, that was in as the head of PR in the UK, and then moved to the global team when we signed the All Blacks and Real Madrid and Beckham and all the contracts that, moved over to the global team. So again, an extraordinary journey in that time with Sydney Olympics and World Cup, Japan, Korea. So there were so many things that gave me a sort of an oversight how a brand behaves, not just from an agency side, but in-house. And again, the moving parts within that Adidas brand was about the convergence of sport and then music and fashion and lifestyle. That was all happening in front of our eyes. And, it's so prevalent to what we're seeing today, how brands behave. And then I jumped back into agency life from my sins in 2004 when we created and set up M&C Saatchi Sport and Entertainment with my business partner, Jamie Wynn Morgan, who's still with me, God help him to this day. And, that was a 20-year journey working in essentially what was an ad agency to start off with. And then we created a whole dedicated sport and entertainment division and big heartbeat of PR and comms and that how I hired in that business. We lasted there for 20 years and loved it dearly. I mean, grew it to 7 offices worldwide, 280 people. I mean, it was a real machine. And I thought then rather stupidly, would one more in us. And Jamie and I decided to, on our 20th year, leave M&C Saatchi and landed here at MSQ Sport and Entertainment, which is our shiny new toy and our shiny new agency within the MSQ group. And we've been in here 18 months and it's moving pretty fast. And it's super, super exciting.
Steve, comms and specifically sport is a very competitive world to get into. Is there any advice for people who are trying to get into that world now, whether that's an agency or a brand or a governing body, etc.? Like, is there any tips that you can give them or advice?
I think so. I go back to whenever I got the tips, whenever I was coming into the game, and I don't think they've changed, Sarah. I think in fact, they're more prevalent today than they've ever been. And that is about understanding your audience, but also understanding a story and what has got an edge and what's got an editorial resonance in things like why would people care to talk about this, share it, repeat it, whatever it may be. And I think you have to be in the game really inquisitive. You've got to understand the media. You've got to understand what makes people tick. You've got to understand what is newsworthy. And to do that, you have to deep dive into, traditional media and social media now. I mean, it's a hard job now for a younger generation because there's so many channels and so much content out there, but not all of it is relevant. And I think there's probably an overload, to be honest with you. I think it's probably harder to cut through than ever before. But if I'm getting into the industry now, I'd be advising anybody to think about, is it actually newsworthy? Do people care? And what is the little edge you can twist things to make sure people want to talk about it? But to do that, you need to have a deep dive and be like multi-sensory in this whole thing, like properly dive in, as opposed to sitting on the fence saying, I want to be a sports, in sport, I want to, I'm a sports fan. I mean, there's plenty of sports fans around, but that doesn't mean you're actually part or right for the role.
You talk about overload there. It's interesting on the sports side, the content side, how much there is now. You talk about 93 Ryder Cup. I think that was the last Ryder Cup that wasn't shown beginning to end on British television. As you know, 97, 95 was maybe the first. So is it harder to get cut through for the content you're working on too, with so much content?
I think it is. I mean, I think it is. You think of the hours that are dumped on YouTube, you think of the constant feeds on Instagram and TikTok. I mean, it is relentless, and brands are always trying to find and navigate a way through that, and it becomes very, very tactical. I think some of the work that we're doing is investing right up front on how you become way more strategic. So then when you're creatively coming up with editorial and ideas and activation concepts that are going to even have a chance of cutting through, it has to be, baked in a really, really strong strategy. But there's so much out there, and I think we're looking at, particularly some of our clients, the Callaway is a good example of going against the tide, because I think a lot of like sport, for example, the generic and endemic sports brands, there's so many of them, and it's so competitive, and there's so many new entries, and there's so many categories, whether it's football, running, golf, tennis, just general athletic product. It's so hard to cut through that noise because they're all publishing the whole time. They're proactively landing content, and they're engaging obviously in their audience through and their communities digitally. So it's become a creative challenge like no other. And I think what we're trying to do as an agency is make sure creatively we understand what our competitors are doing and finding white space where we can communicate. And that's bloody hard to do. And that isn't just about sitting the old school, having a brainstorm, coming up with a few ideas, and then away we go in 24 hours. It's strategically thought out, and you're constantly looking for that white space. Callaway's a great example in the golf market, which is really competitive now, and all the golf manufacturers are very good. But we're actually creating content for them that is tapping into the emotion of the game. We've actually created a big TV spot and a load of social content recently. It doesn't even have a golf shot in it. So, and that's been a big creative challenge about tapping into the emotion that people then want to, resonate more with that content and as a result, more with the brand. So it's tougher and it's harder, but the same challenges remain that, what is a creative idea that's going to actually get people on their toes and people care about and people share.
Steve, I wanted to ask, like compared to marketing, so like we all started in PR roles, and now we've gone into communications and storytelling roles, but the same thing. What is your sort of guiding light of what does communications mean to you?
You make such a good point there. I think this sort of emperor's new clothes of people saying, "Oh, you need storytellers," and it's always been there. Like it's always been the same. I think PR is going through a renaissance, and it has done for the last number of years. We've all come from that background, which just toughens you up because you didn't have the big media spend. You come up with a beautiful piece of advertising creative, and you get media money, and you place it. I mean, I've always thought advertising can't be that difficult. I mean, it is difficult, but sometimes I think how hard is PR because you're trying to cut through everything with really sometimes very low budgets. Really, it's about coming up with stories and it's about people's brain power to do that. So communications I guess, has changed because the challenge has changed and the channels have changed. I mean, when we were starting out in the early days, you're talking about half a dozen titles you'd need to know
Mm.
and get to know, because those are the core audiences, whether that was the tabloids through to, the breakfast shows, through to when Radio 5 came on board. Then you had sort of Big Breakfast, and then you had, GQ was sort of crossing, from fashion into lifestyle into sports. So you probably only had 10 or 12, and then the explosion obviously of Sky Sports coming into to the fore, which was, absolutely one of our key targets. But I think where communication has changed now is that digital explosion and social explosion. And that's what's become so difficult to navigate, because you've got so many audiences to look at. The beauty, however, of sport is you tend to be able to know where those audiences are. And I think what's changed in our world over the last 5 years, certainly, is the information and data that you've got in your audience. It's right there on your fingertips. You know what people are reading, you know what they're sharing, you know what they're buying, you know what they want, you know what they're watching, whether they're in and out in 5 seconds or 30 seconds. So the science is actually, and the data has helped communication now. I think it's then how you find a way to plug into that data, and have a deep dive into that audience. But you can find the audience pretty easily, and you can measure whether it's having an impact. And I think that's where communication just sort of turned on its head in the last 5-10 years in our industry.
I'm interested in what you talked there about with audience, and as you describe your career and some of the big talent that you work with, what's happened in, I suppose, in this era of a sports industry is the overlap with fashion, lifestyle, music, entertainment. So there was a time where sport was sport, it was the back of the newspaper. If you worked in PR, you were stupid. If you worked in sport PR, you must be really stupid. Now, sport is fashion, lifestyle, entertainment. You're talking about golf brands, and I was noticing this week how brands like APC and NN07 are now going into golf. So can you tell us a bit about your experience of how sport moved into those areas and how you adapted?
I think, sports always been like the big Trojan horse, certainly of the industry, but I think convergence has been the thing that sort of almost was like a rocket ship behind it, the industry, because the power of fashion and lifestyle and music colliding with sport, and the scale of sport, because, sport's still the biggest show in town. And then music converging on that, because you then had, and Adidas, I think, was at the forefront of it, if I'm being very honest. And that wasn't just because I was working there at the time, but you think of the impact that the Three Stripes suddenly had, which was that was a pure sports brand logo. It was part of the, iconic look of Adidas. And then when that was suddenly worn by the likes of the Stone Roses and Oasis, and, that's just domestically. You suddenly, it happened in front of our eyes, really. And then they were going into looking at products that were creating for those music talent that had nothing to do with sport. But then you saw, athletes and talent transcending their sport. Beckham being probably the biggest example of that he was straight off the back pages where he'd score a goal from the halfway line, and the next morning he's in the front pages for, something he's done with his hair. So it was an extraordinary time, and I think that convergence of music and fashion and lifestyle, because the audience overlaps a lot.
Mm.
It used to be this sort of snobbery that, oh, just because you like sport doesn't mean you like music, and doesn't mean you like film, and like it's nonsense. And I think now the beauty of the data and understanding those audiences, you know what people like. But that time, sort of the mid 90s, whenever it was an absolute rocket ship, and I think so much of what we saw in those mid 90s is now playing out as we see at the moment. I mean, we're calling it nostalgia, because it's actually nostalgia, for this modern era. And I think a lot of the audience that are actually engaging and buying the product now weren't even around in the mid 90s. So it very much is nostalgia, but it's been something that's made the budgets bigger. It's made the crossover much bigger, and I think you're seeing it through every sport. Through football's obviously been the biggest, most famous part of that where music and entertainment and sport have collided. But you are seeing it in the more nuanced sports like golf, which is, the fashion brands coming into, as you quite rightly say, Chris, and the lifestyle side of golf and tennis. It's just, the brands that are coming into those spaces and signing some of the talent. I mean, look at Jack Draper, with Fiore. That's nobody had ever heard of the Fiore brand until 6 months ago in particular. And it's, they're using that to transcend the audiences. So the beauty of our industry is it's never stopped. It's restless. And I guess that's why we've sort of gone again, setting up a new agency. But it's the industry is very hot at the moment on that basis.
Steve, on when you're talking about brand partnerships or athlete partnerships, for example, I think over time where we've gotten to now is it's less about the monetary value of that partnership and more what it can bring together as a collaboration. So whether that's a new audience or, adding value. Can you talk about that a bit, about the importance of those partnerships together?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a big commercial part of those, but there's a value exchange. I think brands are certainly should be, if they're not doing this, they should be more selective of who they're aligning with. I mean, there's always a risk signing, as you know, with individual talent. We've seen like some crises play out over the years. Look at the Kanye situation recently. But there's always risk associated by aligning your brand to an individual partnership with an athlete. But the power shift in terms of athletes and controlling their own channels, I mean, we started to see that 10, 15 years ago in a smaller way, but now this explosion we've seen of athletes controlling their own destiny, if you like, the way they communicate with their own Insta channels, their own social channels, and brands then playing out. The crunch is that if you're going to put your brand in that space, it's got to look authentic. That's your golden rule. It doesn't look clunky. It doesn't look paid for or bought. And again, that's quite hard to do. So I think the sensible brands are looking at the value exchange and making sure it's really clean and clear and real, that it doesn't feel like you've bought that. But creatively, that can be really strong, or you can get it spectacularly wrong. But there's no question this sort of direct to consumer, direct to fan communication through athlete channels is, again, aren't we advising brands on that all the time about if you are going to align with one or two, three, four, or even a portfolio of athletes, again, what's the story you want them to tell? What is the communication you want them to put out? When does that go out? What is the tone of it? What's the look and feel of it? It's all the comms challenges that we have in this industry now. But it's quite exciting. It's quite exciting because the numbers are vast if you get it right. Again, so it's not going away anytime soon.
It's interesting, the athlete as a channel you talk about there. There's, I suppose, a relaxation or a different approach now to content from their own sport that athletes are able to use. I also remember back to when, I'm going to swear here, but when Ozil came to Arsenal and he had a bigger social following than Arsenal, the club themselves. So, yeah, maybe just a bit more about how their athletes use their own channels to the benefit of the brands you work with.
Yeah, I guess it depends how there's a lot of athletes don't want to open, their life up to the world. And then there's others who want to open up every 5 seconds to the world. So it's a fine line again of, what's right and what's wrong there. I guess the audience will be the judge of that. But, I think there's been such a saturation, I think, of content now. And I think there's an overload of behind the scenes. I mean, we were doing behind the scenes, filming around TV ads that we'd film with Beckham, Prince Naz, Liverpool, Real Madrid, the All Blacks, Jonah Lomu, for years and years we were doing that. And we've done it in the early days when we were at M&C Saatchi with, we created Wayne Rooney's Street Striker, which is a 4-year TV show series that then ended up of an idea that when we filmed behind the scenes of Wayne doing skills on the street. It became suddenly a TV concept that we wrote within a day, and suddenly it happened that 4 years later we'd made these shows. And same with Ronaldo. We were doing stuff with him for years behind the scenes. The value of the content behind the scenes was more value of the stuff that you actually ended up publishing. So,
And your Frank Lampard video diaries, remember?
yes, yeah. I mean, there's been so many examples. I sort of look at it now, and when people talk about branded content desk, I'm like we were doing that 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Even back in 1993, we made the documentary for the BBC called Craig's Boot, which was purely about the Predator boot. It was a 1 hour documentary in the BBC Two, which was like the highest ever viewed documentary on BBC Two, like in history, and it was about a football boot. So I look at people again. It's a bit Emperor's New Clothes about branded content. That's just like it's always been there. And I think what's happening now is just it's become a bit generic, and it's a bit of overload. And I think some of the athletes that are putting stuff out, it can be overly commercial, and it looks like they're doing it because it's not really part of their lives. They're doing it because it's a bit of a forced feed. And I think the really smart athletes are much more in control of how they communicate the perception of their image, how they want to portray that image. And again, they've got a strategic overview on it. Again, that all sounds very controlling, but it's not. It's actually the smart athletes are really managing and curating it over time. Ronaldo's been pretty good at that. Yes, he can be quite commercial, but his numbers don't lie. And it's finding a balance between what you want to show of your life that you find is interesting, and then what you think is, from a partner and brand point of view, what you think is interesting, but doesn't feel like a logo been slapped on it. So again, it comes down to that creative challenge, and that some athletes need the advice to do that, and the editorial context to do that.
I think what's really positive is seeing now that athletes do have their own channels and are in control of that, that they can actually show a bit more personality. They can have purpose and be activists, a few of them. Whereas, I mean, as we know, that's been going on for a long time. But in the past, you had to go through the media to tell that story. And obviously, it's very, a good news story that they were doing things for charity. And so it didn't land very often. Whereas now they can just go direct to their audience. Have you seen much of that, of like athletes, with purpose and being activists?
Yeah, I mean, they're all, again, it comes down to how they want to portray and curate their, image and their lifestyle to an audience, to their fan base. I've quite liked the fact that the more vocal athletes will be out there supporting causes. I mean, we've seen, there's been a wave of sort of social purpose, certainly post-COVID. Sometimes I think it maybe went a bit too far, because I think we're losing the fact that sport is ultimately entertainment as well. And I'm not been flippant about social purpose in any shape or form, because I think it's amazing the power of those athletes' voices. But again, it's finding a balance that, sport is also an entertainment product, and you want to be entertained a lot of the time. And I think the reason sport has done incredibly well is it's almost like it's a release from daily life and the stress of daily life. Like, the world is in a terrible place if we're looking at it, not to be too negative, but it is. And people default to their passions in that time. We've seen it when there was the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, 2010. People, sport attendances went up, cinema attendances went up. And we're seeing that again. Sport is big ticket. The big stuff's selling out, whether it's World Cups, Olympics, the Masters this week. Everything is selling out, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And athletes, as a result, have a bigger voice, I think, than ever before, because there's this sort of massive momentum around the sports industry. It's the hottest ticket in town in almost every country you go to. So I think, again, it comes down, if I'm advising an athlete of what they want to support, it's got to be truly authentic. It can't be just tokenistic, and it's got to have a call to action to get their audience to do something. So it's not a little CSR box that they're ticking, the box that they're showing that they're doing good. I think athletes have the power to engage and mobilize an audience, and I think that's incredibly powerful. It's not going away, but I think, it's certainly, it's finding the balance of that and the entertainment side of sport, I think, still.
It's interesting how often sport is the focus of people making sense of big issues in the world. I mean, we're going to see that with the World Cup, FIFA World Cup this year in the States, but in making sense of the world through sport, I'm intrigued. I'm going back to the beginning. How much did sport, you talk passionately about why sport matters. How did it matter to you as you grew up? And how did you turn that into a career at the beginning? Was it your intention to, or did it happen?
I mean, it happened in a number of ways, but I mean, the sort of real basic is that I always wanted to work in something that I cared about. And to be honest, my dad was brilliant at it. He was like, he wasn't one of those. He would say, I want you should be doing all your studies and become a lawyer or work in the bank or all that stuff. He wasn't like that himself. And I was around the BBC Sports department in the very early days because my dad had a show there. He did his own radio show for years. He had TV shows when he was very young, even though that wasn't his day job, if you know what I mean. They came from a building family actually, but my dad hated that, and he actually wanted to be much more in the entertainment industry. But so I was literally coming off the rugby pitch on Saturday morning, going straight down with my dad into the BBC Sports department where he had his own show, which had for 15 years or something, and it was in the lead up to the 2:30 kickoffs. So he was on at 1:10. And the head of BBC Sport there, this wonderful sort of extraordinary lady called Joy Williams, who was very flamboyant character around BBC Northern Ireland. She said to me when I was 14, she goes, "What are you going to do in life?" She goes, "Do you know what? You should be in PR and you should be in sport." I'm like, I look back in that now and almost laugh at it. I remember her telling me it so vividly. She was quite a scary character, but amazing, sort of effervescent, and it never left me. And then I literally thought that's all I want to do. Didn't even think anything about anything else. And I've always said that to people, if you can find something that you're passionate about, you can wake up in the morning and care about, then it won't feel like a job. And you'll hear that a lot. It sounds very corny, but that has happened to me forever. That I've got up in the morning, cared about it, have a emotional engagement with it, and sort of, yes, you follow your dreams a wee bit, but you can navigate and create chances for yourself because you're so focused on it. As opposed to being a bit sort of, oh, well, I would really love to if possibly this could come off. I was just like, that's what I'm going to do. And, if it works, it works. And, it's something I've just been so focused on forever.
Would you pass that similar advice to your children, Steve, about like looking at their careers and what A levels they do, etc.?
I would, yeah, because I think, I've got two daughters, at the minute they're going through, I'm not even thinking about what they're going to do, but I've always said to them, follow your dream on it and be ruthless in your focus and make sure whatever you want to do in life, you care about it. Like you've got emotional sort of attachment to it, because then you'll not be going into a job. I mean, the amount of people I've known over the years who've jumped around jobs all the time, and jumped around careers, whether one minute they're a dentist, the next minute they're a solicitor, the next minute they're an optician. I mean, it's like quite crazy how many people sort of jump around. I think if you've got that focus from when you're younger, it helps. Now, you might change your mind as you progress, and like people can do whatever they want, but yeah, I would always be encouraging to sort of, if you have a passion, try and translate that into something that can be commercially viable for you. Um, and again, it's not easy to do that, but if you've got that relentless focus, then I think you're going to have less wastage in what you do.
Do you find that the industry has opened up a bit more now to sort of females in the sports industry? Is it easier for them, and for your daughters going forward, is it more positive?
I think there's a lot still to do, if I'm honest with you. I think there's particular leadership roles, but I think it's changing in front of our eyes. And you look at the agencies we've created over the years, it's been absolutely balanced. In fact, more female ratio to males, and I've been pretty biased towards that because I think often, was so much better and calmer and actually creatively very, very strong. And I think, look, it comes down to, understanding your audiences as well. You think of the buying and commercial power of, the female audiences across sport now and anything. If you don't have a team in place that understands that and a leadership team in place that understands that, well, then it doesn't make any sense. You're not doing your job properly. But I think it can do a lot more. I think the industry has certainly thrown off its old school tie reputation. I think it's, also thrown off its boys' clubs reputation. But there's many parts of it need to change and continue to change. And, I hope I can do my bit in that because I feel very, very strongly about it. And that's nothing to do just because I have daughters in it. They might not choose to be in it at all. But I feel like the industry can never take its eye off that. And I mean, it would be very stupid if it did. But it's changing very, very positively, I think. I don't know what you guys think in that, but it feels like there's some big movements. And, we've seen this incredible growth of women's sport over the last 4 or 5 years, which is not going away. And I think that's one part of our industry. But just sport and fashion and lifestyle, I mean, the whole industry has grown, and it's wonderful that it's continued this sort of momentum. But with that momentum, it needs new talent coming in, it needs new minds coming in, it needs people from so many diverse backgrounds, because that's how the sports are playing out and the audiences are buying into it. So if you don't replicate that in how you market and within your teams, well, then you're not going to succeed.
Really interesting. I think one of my first clients in agency at the beginning of my career was women's football. So I've always had a passion for that, and trying to sell women's football in those years very hard. But it's growth and the growth of women's sport. Actually, we talk about change. I think relevant to this is work-life balance. It was a phrase that was never used at the beginning, certainly of my Sky years. And the phrase, your word, the use of overload, with so much more media, so much more sport. It's not just weekends and the odd evening, it's every evening, every day, around the clock, from every territory. How do you get your balance? How do you tune in enough to have that curiosity, know what's going on, but also be able to cut through the clutter and protect yourself a bit as well?
Yeah, I have to say I find it difficult. I've still found it difficult because the noise is relentless. Okay, we're in agency life. Like, agency life is really hard as well. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it is tough because you've got so many stakeholders you're trying to please and engage with and communicate with and bring with you and motivate and persuade. I mean, there's so many sort of energies going on there and the amount of noise around sport. And we're lucky we work across so many different brands which are linked to so many different sports. So, just from a broadcast play out, I mean, there's something on every day. And then you multiply that by every country. So it's hard to switch off, I have to say. And what I'm trying to do is provide balance within our teams. Because it is and can be all engulfing, Chris, as you very, very well know, from your days in this game, and Sarah will know exactly the same. It can take over your life, and you got to be very careful of that it doesn't sort of take away, and then you're not in the room. I'm pretty conscious that a lot of the early years, I wasn't in the room at all, when I was not in the office or not in work. And I really am frustrated with myself about that, because I just had this drive to, keep going and keep the show on the road and keep enjoying it and keep our clients happy and our people happy. So, often I didn't stop and, have these nice moments of calm in between and be in the room and live in the moment. And I think what I'm trying to do in this next phase of our agency life, creating the business here at MSQ, is provide balance. Like, I'm not saying it's not going to be hard work and it's not going to be engulfing, and because that's the agency life and that's how we've chosen to be in that. And if you want to be part of it, you got to be tough and you got to get it, and you got to be aware. You've got to be really aware to be able to then advise your clients, but it still needs balance. And I'm trying to make sure, the people who have joined us in the team have taken the leap of faith, because 18 months ago we didn't exist. We had no clients, no people, almost didn't even have a name, no revenue. So, we've persuaded people who in very good jobs to come and join us and join this bloody crusade that we're on. But what I don't want to do is make sure I don't want them to have regrets that it's so engulfing that they can't sort of see the wood from the trees. And so we're trying to make sure we live in the moment, enjoy it, and have a deep dive, but have mutual respect of how you actually go about our business. And sometimes moments of calm within the sort of this relentless business we're in, make sure we'll all be very enduring, and we're going to be around in a healthy way, because we need our minds to be sharp and our creative minds to be even sharper.
And actually, that break from sport can also give you some of the best ideas. Remember Andy Melvin at Sky would always tell the senior production, all production people, to watch specific programs. 24 was one, and watch entertainment programs, watch Saturday night television, watch films. You get ideas more. So actually, curiosity and calmness are important to the core challenge of promoting sport.
They very much are. And I think, we've seen an explosion, for example, in the sports world, of documentaries and long form content. Long form content was from the movie industry. Documentaries came more from shining a light on, very newsworthy topics, whether they were, topics that were very serious issues or whatever. But sport has seen this explosion of documentaries and longer form content that really was led by the film industry and the news industry. And again, that is something that you can only learn when you're engaging in things and you're watching them. But yeah, I think you learn from everything. I mean, I think we've learned hugely from the music industry. I think we've learned hugely from the entertainment industry, more broadly, and we've learned unbelievably, certainly from my point of view, on the fashion industry. How they create collections, how they tease things, how they work with talent, how they launch things, how the live moment is this big newsworthy global reveal. So, I think all those learnings are still incredibly prevalent from all those industries, but you don't want to make it sort of, you're so engulfed by stuff that you become tight and can't think clearly. So, but again, if you're passionate about it and it's something linked to your passion, then it doesn't feel like that. It feels like just that's what we do. And that's what, thank goodness that's happened to me. It hasn't felt like too onerous, because it's something that I work in, but it's something I'm also passionate about, whether I worked in it or not.
Steve, an age-old question, but like, how would you see like measuring what success is in comms and PR? I mean, it's something we've obviously battled forever, but I mean, what I found in-house is quite often when your KPIs are quarterly, but especially in sports, that's a long-term play. And obviously it depends on who the client is, but yeah, like, how have you found that, of how to measure what success looks like?
I think it's just been this perennial debate, hasn't it? So, I mean, I think it's never gone away from the early days. Always, I was always frustrated that PR was the last 10,000 in the pot of a massive, marketing budget. And it was like, can you PR this ad, or can you come up with something in 24 hours to get this in the papers or on TV? It's like, that's where it's changed fundamentally, because strategically PR and PR is sort of misunderstood, really. I think it's editorial communication, really, is how you'd sort of describe it, I think now. I think the measurement of it has to be in two ways. Number one, about brand endurance. So, and the impact of that the communication editorially has had on that brand uplift over time. You can have these firework moments, of course, within 24 hours if you land a big story, or you land a piece of content that's really flies. You can measure the impact in that just through the data. I mean, digital comms has allowed us to see the views and the engagement and the shares and all the rest of it. But but it's about brand sentiment over time, I think, is where you're looking at, which I think you can truly measure. And then the other side of it is because brands are enduring, but products come and go, but a lot of comms that we work around is around specific products as well. So you can genuinely measure the commercial impact of that communication. So I think we're constantly looking at it and monitoring it. I think there's no one size fits all. I think it needs to be bespoke to everything you do. So because every brand, if you come back to the brief that you get, what are you measuring against that specific brief, as opposed to let's create this generic big measurement thing. I think we can, we're looking at it very specifically here at MSQ with the impact of AI and how you can actually understand the audience more, how you can measure the audience more, how you can see results more. And we're looking at building something truly bespoke that can be fine-tuned for each client brief, as opposed to just a big generic thing. But it's not going away. And I think to justify things and justify bigger budgets over time, it's always been about how you measure the impact of the work you're doing.
Do you think, you just mentioned AI there, but the power now of the LLMs, that I'm wondering if it will start to skew the channels that PR people will use, because I know that it only pulls in results from certain places. So therefore, will we only go to those ones,
Possibly, yeah. And it's a big challenge for us. I mean, everyone's throwing around AI here, there, and everywhere. People are scared of it, or people are loving it, or people are embracing it. So, it's all playing out, and you can only, I think, understand it by just doing a massive deep dive into it, what it can and can't do. I mean, I think what we're seeing is it has been very, very efficient in doing certain things, but there's a start and stop on it. As we said at the moment, you've got a prompt, and that is human prompting. That's you understanding what you're trying to get out of it. It's otherwise, and that's a craft. That's going to be a creative craft. So I think particularly in our creative teams, they're prompting, and they prompt very differently the way I'd prompt. That's why they're creative, and that's why they're in that role. We then have strategy within the team. They'll prompt slightly differently and engage with the LLMs slightly differently. But I think the measurement of all that is, I hope it doesn't become so skewed and so scientific that you're going to lose the flair. I've always worried about that everything becomes too robotic and we're controlled by machines. Because I think inherent human flair is like the greatest part of our industry, is big ideas that land and everybody talks about. And that is, flair is hard to even describe what that is, but it's something that is incredibly good to be around and energizing to be around. And if you can then suddenly have the help of, these LLMs and machines and robots and whatever, well, it's going to be a very, very, I would hope it would be a healthy tension as opposed to be a tension. That's certainly the way we're looking at it, because I think it's like anything, we were all wildly sort of freaked out when all the social and digital channels all came out. And that didn't take too long to suddenly, that becomes the norm. And I suspect within 18 months, we'll be looking back in this in AI and going, well, this is completely the norm. And that's how we're using it is the best way.
I think it's really interesting there, the way you talk about AI as a partner rather than the sole solution. And as we've gone through this conversation, we've had AI as a partner. We've talked about brands as partners. We've talked about athletes and athlete partnerships. I'm interested in partnerships in your building and in your business and in your career. And obviously there's one that's been constant, but the importance of partnerships within your business and the ways that you work for your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think my view on that, Chris, has always been, it's really nice to do something with somebody else within business. And, Jamie's been my partner in crime in this, world for an awful long time, and my whole agency life from Saatchi's onwards. So, that's 2004, we're 22 years working side by side in that. And I think, it's taking the yin and yang approach, which is great. I wouldn't wish anybody to be like me. So it's great that, Jamie is a great foil for each other, and we actually think incredibly alike. But that partnership has been incredibly enduring. I mean, God, I don't know how he's put up with me, but I value him so much. And I think it's that experience to have around. And then, the partnerships that within agency life are just so critical. And, we're building a leadership team here. Some people we've never met before and didn't know, but came on reputation, interviewed really well. And, my view is in agency life, we're only as good as the people we have. It's all we've got. Like, I couldn't give a damn what the name is above the door. I mean, it doesn't matter. I think the sort of key thing for me is that those partnerships are built on trust, and you back each other. And I'm like, there's going to be tensions, but as long as they're healthy tensions, because that's what you need. It's business to strive on to make us better. But partnership is important because you can share things and talk about things and find solutions. As long as you're diagnosing things to find solutions the whole time, as opposed to just a big moaning fest, well then, that's incredibly powerful. And then the other side of agency life is actually having genuine partnerships with your clients. And like, we've tried to do that in our whole career. I mean, I think, from my side of things, I've wanted our clients to think of us as a creative partner to them, an advisory partner to them, and tried for, always stay away from the them and us. So here's your agency and here's your client, because it's, I hated that sort of blame game sometimes, and from both ways. And I think if you're in it together and you set the stall out at the start and you're very honest with each other and everything's built on trust and having a right good go and having a spirit of that, I sort of think that's why some of the clients have been with us, and we would have wanted them to come with us as well. The likes of the O2s, Gareth and the team there are extraordinary in terms of partners. And, they're just incredibly supportive. Like, we're in this together, and we want to rip up trees for them. And, with our new partnership with Barclays is exactly the same. We really respect the clients. They're very experienced. They've got incredible rights, and we want to, again, do the same thing. Callaway, what a partnership that's been. They were our founding client in the new agency, as I said, when we had no people, no team, like nothing. So in terms of building a partnership with them and understanding, that's what we're trying to do. And I hope that we maintain that position for a long time. But it is absolutely crucial.
Steve, it's been a fascinating conversation. I think we could do it in several parts. And to hear the message with your experience of a period of renaissance in PR, but to also hear the stories of the brilliant basics that should be there throughout, such as partnerships. Your experience of, your word overload, but expansion in channels, in opportunities and commercial opportunity in an industry, and how to navigate through relentless noise to find, as you say, the white space by being strategic, but at the same time not forgetting to have fun in the tactical delivery, because it should be fun and it's sport. And I think what I hear very loudly from you as well is it's not only that constant energy and the curiosity, but the constant search for relevance, and making sure that you're finding that place of relevance for clients. It's a fascinating career, and it's been a really interesting conversation. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks, Sarah. I mean, it's something that's obviously close to all our hearts, and I'd be urging anyone of any age to consider being in this game. It's given us great challenges, but it's given us great sort of emotional rewards as well. And I think some of the things you don't realize. I think a lot of things that you've been and seen and learnt until you move on to the next thing. I mean, even moving from our last agency to here at MSQ, I mean, I sort of can't believe what I learned over 20 years in the previous agency. And we carry that forward. You're learning the whole time, and that's what keeps you on your toes. And because of the changing nature of the industry, the changing nature of the media that's available to us and open to us, the changing sort of, technologies that are around us now that we're trying to infuse into the business, it's sort of never ending, but it's also, that's what keeps it fresh, and that's what keeps all our minds fresh, and keeps us young, I hope, as well.
Thank you, Steve. Lastly, for our audience, if you've watched this far, then thank you very much. If you've enjoyed this chat, then there are more videos on our YouTube. Follow us on LinkedIn. There's also a newsletter you can join, or if you've got a bit of time and you want to join the CIPR Sports Network as part of our committee, then check us out on LinkedIn and send us a message. But thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Steve.